Students, today I want to help you understand fragments and run-ons and how to recognize a fragment and a run-on in a sentence. Sentence fragments are a group of words pretending to be a sentence. They're easy to recognize when they appear out of context. For example, when the cat leaped onto the table. When you read that standing alone all by itself, you automatically realize there's part of that sentence missing. The same thing applies to running for the bus. When you hear that standing alone, you realize there's part of that missing. What happened while I was running for the bus? But they are difficult to recognize when they appear next to a related sentence. You have to stop and think and precisely look at the punctuation. Here's an example. We had just sat down to dinner when the cat leaped onto the table. If you hear that being read or you read that to yourself, you automatically think, that sounds okay. But if you examine closely, you will see a period at the end of dinner, forcing the second part to be set up as an independent sentence, standing alone. When the cat leaped onto the table, period. That cannot stand alone. Here's another example. I tripped and twisted my ankle running for the bus. Oftentimes when you read a sentence like that, you read it and you automatically assume this is correct. But again, you have to carefully examine the punctuation. There is a period after ankle, indicating that running for the bus is standing alone as an independent sentence, and that is incorrect. A complete sentence must contain at least one full independent clause. An independent clause will have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. It must begin, or it may begin with a subordinate clause, but it must be followed by an independent clause. Here's an example. While running in the rain this morning, comma, I slipped and skinned my knee. We have the subordinate clause at the beginning, but it is separated with a comma and followed by the independent part of the sentence. Therefore, this is written correctly. How do you repair sentences when they contain fragments? One way is to pull the fragment into a nearby sentence. Another way is to rewrite the entire fragment as a complete sentence. Here's an example. We had just sat down to dinner, period. When the phone rang, period. The way this is written, it's set up as two independent sentences. However, upon careful examination, we discover when the phone rang cannot stand alone. It is setting up a condition that something else has happened when the phone rang. What happened? It leaves us wondering. Here's an example of how to correct that. We had just sat down to dinner when the phone rang. Take out the period, make the W a lowercase, and allow the sentence to flow smoothly as one sentence. Here's another example. I tripped and twisted my ankle running in the rain. Well, if you look at this carefully, running in the rain is set up to be an independent sentence, but it is not. So to correct it, we need to move the phrase to the beginning of the sentence. We cannot leave it at the end of the sentence, because if we do that, this is what it sounds like. I tripped and twisted my ankle running in the rain. When we put the comma here and make this lowercase, it sounds as though our ankle alone is running in the rain. Therefore, we have to move this entire phrase to the beginning of the sentence, because it's acting as an adverb and it needs to modify who was actually running in the rain. It was not just my ankle alone. It was my whole body. It was I. And this is how it appears. Running in the rain, comma, I tripped and twisted my ankle. Remember, when you move a phrase or a clause to the beginning of a sentence, you must place a comma after the phrase or the clause. A subordinate clause is patterned like a sentence. It contains a subject and a verb, but it leaves out the complete thought. You may use the following words to introduce the clause: after, although, as if, because, before, even though, how, if, since, so that, than, that, though, unless, until, when, where, whether, which, while, who, whom, whose, why. Subordinate clauses function in the sentence as an adjective, an adverb, or a noun. Here are some examples. Americans have come to fear the West Nile virus because it is transmitted by the common mosquito. The part because it is transmitted by the common mosquito is set up to be an independent sentence, but the word because sets it up with a condition to follow, therefore it cannot stand alone. If we merely attach it to the end of the sentence by removing the period and making the B a lowercase, it sounds like this. Americans have come to fear the West Nile virus because it is transmitted by the common mosquito. Now the sentence is written correctly and is appropriately punctuated. Although psychiatrist Peter Kramer expresses concern about Prozac, many other doctors believe that the benefits of antidepressants outweigh the risks. Okay, the first part of that is a clause, a dependent clause beginning with a subordinating conjunction, and it leaves us hanging. Although psychiatrist Peter Kramer expresses concerns about Prozac, it leaves us thinking, thinking what is happening next. Although he expresses concerns about this, what? It doesn't tell us. So we have to attach it to the rest of the sentence. Although psychiatrist Peter Kramer expresses concerns about Prozac, comma, many other doctors believe that the benefits of antidepressants outweigh the risks. Here are some fragmented phrases. The archaeologists worked slowly. Okay, that stands alone. The archaeologists worked slowly. Examining and labeling every pottery shard they uncovered. Examining and labeling every pottery shard they uncovered. That does have a subject and verb, but it leaves us hanging and dangling. We don't know, it doesn't make complete sense. So we have to attach it to the sentence. The archaeologists worked slowly, examining and labeling every pottery shard they uncovered. The two parts have to merge together as one in order for the sentence to make complete sense and be written correctly. Jamie explained how to access our new database. Also, how to submit expense reports and request vendor payments. These two cannot be joined together. This part sounds awkward standing alone. Also, how to submit expense reports and request vendor payments. If you just put the comma here and connect it, it still is going to leave an awkward sound. So we have to completely restructure. And in some cases, it's best to restructure and go ahead and leave both sentences separated, but restructure the part that is not a complete sentence. The only best way to do this, let me read it if we just put a comma here. Jamie explained how to access our new database, comma, also how to submit expense reports and request vendor payments. If you connect it, it still has an awkward sound. It's not flowing smoothly. So we have to separate it and make two separate sentences. Jamie explained how to access our new database, period. She also taught us how to submit expense reports and request vendor payments. Oftentimes, students will just attach a thought in an awkward way and think, well, that makes sense, so I'll leave it as is. But when you read the sentence, it does not flow smoothly to the rest of the sentences, and it leaves an awkwardness. So sometimes you have to restructure the fragmented part of the sentence so that it sounds smoother. Here's another example. The woodpecker finch of the Galapagos Islands carefully selects a twig of a certain size and shape, and then uses this tool to pry out grubs from the trees. Okay, this part is awkward sounding. You should not begin a sentence with a coordinating conjunction. And let's look now at the best way to connect these two sentences. The woodpecker finch of the Galapagos Islands carefully selects a twig of a certain size and shape and then uses this tool to pry out grubs from the trees. By doing that, we have connected the two sentences. We do not need a comma because we are not connecting two actual sentences. We're connecting the verb form. Selects and uses. And all of these other words are just additional words, but what we have here is one sentence being connected by a coordinating conjunction, and we are connecting the verbs selects and uses. Therefore, it sounds smoother. Here's another example. It has been said that there are only 3 indigenous American art forms: musical comedy, jazz, and soap opera. Okay, the musical comedy, jazz, and soap opera is not a complete sentence. Therefore, it should not be set up as an independent sentence. It needs to be connected to this part of the sentence, and in this case, the best way to connect it is to add a colon and make this a list. It has been said that there are only 3 indigenous American art forms, colon, musical comedy, jazz, and soap opera. Another example. In the 20th century, the South produced some great American writers, such as Flannery O'Connor, William Faulkner, Alice Walker, and Tennessee Williams. I have seen so many students do this in their paper. They set this up as a complete sentence, such as Flannery O'Connor, William Faulkner, Alice Walker, and Tennessee Williams. That is not a complete sentence. You cannot do that. The best way to do this is to make it flow smoothly within sentence next to it. In the 20th century, comma, the South produced some great American writers, comma, such as Flannery O'Connor, William Faulkner, Alice Walker, and Tennessee Williams. That has a smoother tone to it in writing. Fragment is sometimes permissible to be used for effect. And we've talked about this before when using an emphatic. And when you want to make an emphatic statement for a special purpose, it is permissible to set up a fragment, but only for that reason. Here's an example. Following the dramatic Americanization of their children, even my parents grew more publicly confident, especially my mother. Especially my mother is your emphatic statement. It can stand alone because it's not exactly a sentence, it's an emphatic. Therefore, it is permissible, but only when used in a situation such as this. Here's another example. Dinner was delicious, once again. The once again is standing alone, not as a complete sentence, but as an emphatic. Therefore, it can be punctuated as a sentence. Now let's look at run-on sentences. Independent clauses that have not been correctly joined are run-on sentences. Correctly joining requires that you do the following. Use coordinating conjunctions such as and, but, or, nor, for, yet, and so. Or you could use a semicolon to correctly join run-on sentences. Here are some examples. Air pollution poses risks to all humans. It can be deadly for asthma sufferers. Okay, we call that a fused sentence. It is fused, and if you'll notice, I had difficulty reading it as the fused sentence because automatically I realized this is not correct. But in a fused sentence, you have two sentences without any punctuation. You have no semicolon. You do not have a comma conjunction. You just have it running together. It's fused together. Here's another example. Air pollution poses risks to all humans, comma. It can be deadly for asthma sufferers. We call this a comma splice because we do have the comma, but we have omitted the conjunction. When you use a comma joining two sentences, you have to include the conjunction after the comma. Here's another example. Air pollution poses risks to all humans, comma. However, comma, it can be deadly for asthma sufferers. We still have the comma splice because though we added the word however is a transitional word setting up the next sentence. We still have two sentences connected by only a comma. There is no conjunction. Here's an example of how this could be corrected. Air pollution poses risks to all humans, semicolon. However, comma, it can be deadly for asthma sufferers. This is correct because we have the semicolon and then we added our transitional word, which makes the sentence flow smoothly. And now we have the complete thoughts correctly separated. Here's another example of how this same sentence can be corrected. Air pollution poses risks to all humans, comma, but it can be deadly for asthma sufferers. This is correct because we have the comma and the conjunction connecting the two sentences. If separating with a colon for effect make sure to capitalize the second part of the sentence. Nuclear waste is hazardous. This is an indisputable fact. It is permissible to separate with a colon when you are trying to emphasize a definite, specific point. But when you do that, make sure that that point that you are emphasizing is connected or directly related to the previous sentence. And you can do that. It is permissible. Just remember to always capitalize the first word of the next sentence. You do not have to do that when you use a semicolon. But this is only done when you want to emphasize a point, such as this. It is also permissible to use a dash to emphasize your point. If you use a dash, you do not have to capitalize the second part of it. Here's an example. The female black widow spider is often a widow of her own making. Dash. She has been known to eat her partner after mating. Gross. Okay. If you will notice, there are no spaces between the making, dash, and she. They go together. No capitalization right here on she, but the dash is separating the two thoughts. This is being connected and attached in order to stress and emphasize this last point. It's better sometimes to make two clauses, separate sentences, when one part is a question. In other words, do not join a question to a sentence. Here's an example of how this should not appear. Why should we spend money on space exploration? We have enough underfunded programs on Earth. This is a question, and it is separated with only a comma. This is incorrect. The best way to write this is to say, why should we spend money on space exploration? With a question mark. New sentence. We have enough underfunded programs here on Earth. Sometimes it's best to simply restructure the entire sentence. For example, one of the most famous advertising slogans is Wheaties Cereal's Breakfast of Champions associated the cereal with famous athletes. Okay. It associated the cereal with famous athletes is a sentence all by itself. But the way we have it connected by only a comma to the previous sentence. It is permissible to connect it, but we're going to have to remove the word it and replace it with which, so that it sounds like this. One of the most famous advertising slogans in Wheaties Cereal's Breakfast of Champions, which is associated the cereal with famous athletes. We have now connected it by using the word which. We've set it up as a clause now rather than an independent sentence. And by setting it up with the word which, we've turned it into a dependent clause, and now we can correctly attach it to the previous sentence. Another example. Mary McLeod Bethune was the 17th child of former slaves. She founded the National Council of Negro Women in 1935. This is incorrect because we have two simple sentences connected by only a comma. We can connect these, but we will have to slightly restructure the sentence. And we can do that, but we can connect them by only the comma if we remove the pronoun functioning as the subject, she. And it reads like this. Mary McLeod Bethune, the 17th child of former slaves, founded the National Council of Negro Women in 1935. By doing it this way, we've set this part up as a positive, restating who Mary McLeod Bethune is, and we have separated it with commas, saying this is additional information that is not necessary, but the main point of the sentence is Mary McLeod Bethune founded the National Council of Negro Women in 1935. This truly is the best way to restructure this particular sentence. Students, I hope you have found this video helpful in understanding fragments and run-ons and how to best correct your fragments and run-ons.